right, hey, good morning, folks. Once again, we are back. We are still taking a look at the tropics, and then today is still Tuesday, August 29th, 2023. This is your longer form update on Hurricane Idalia this morning. We're going to be going into the latest for the regional area of Jacksonville, Florida, and then we're going to talk some weather, just some general weather stuff regarding Idalia and some of the small details we're watching today as she makes landfall. If you want the quick down and dirty version with impacts and things you need to know on the wave tops, there's a short version video on the channel this morning, dated today, that will tell you all you need to know in a couple minutes or less. But I'm going to combine these two because, I like y'all, but I'm not recording three separate videos this morning, so you have to kind of deal with it. But we will start with Jacksonville. I'll make y'all sit through all the mumbo jumbo if you don't want to. As, of course, we know our players here this morning. Hurricane Idalia leaving Cuba, getting quite well organized this morning. We have Major Hurricane Franklin moving along, and we have this cold front sitting between them, kind of pushing Idalia along towards Florida. Again, that landfall is expected this afternoon, or I'm sorry, the Wednesday morning rather, as a major hurricane. The latest from the Hurricane Center this morning does show that landfall cone. No major adjustments were made, but these westward ticks have happened overnight. And for Jacksonville, that is actually somewhat good news. I hesitate to sound the all clear or anything like that, but this is a little bit of an improvement from yesterday's forecast, so slightly better. Is what I will tell you. This is the National Weather Service watches and warnings this morning. They have a PDF briefing normally. It's really nice and pretty, but it's not working for whatever reason. Maybe my computer just sucks. So this is actually the dividing line for the hurricane warnings this morning. Yesterday they were actually up to the counties that basically make up Northeast Florida. They bordered Clay and Duval and whatnot, but they've actually moved them back a tick. So counties like Baker actually got pulled out of the hurricane warning, and that hurricane warning now sets up just west of Gainesville, just west of Ocala, and just to the east of Lake City. It does include Valdosta, and it makes up to the corner near Tallahassee. So this hurricane force winds expected in the bright pink. Tropical storm force winds are generally expected in the rest of this swath. So all of the Jacksonville area is under a tropical storm warning. Tropical storm conditions, obviously winds above 39 miles an hour, rainfall, all the stuff that is associated with tropical storms. We go ahead and look at the Hurricane Center's threat graphic this morning. This is the updated wind threat graphic, and if you remember yesterday, this red encompassed most of Jacksonville and kind of went down like this and basically cut off Wright and Clay County. That has actually pulled back a little bit. So the potential for wind gusts 74 to 110 miles per hour are in the red here. Get the graphic down here at the bottom. Um, and that has actually moved a little bit further to the west. Again, like I said, these westward adjustments pull the worst of the winds back to the west a little bit more and a little bit more. Now, it's very important to understand that you guys are still almost all in the orange, which is winds 58 to 73 miles an hour. That is still on par with what a lot of the area got in Hurricane Irma as she passed. So that's not a picnic. That's not a walk in the park. That brings down power lines. That knocks over trees. That causes damage to roofs and siding and things like that. That is still a dangerous amount of wind. It's not like, oh, it's going to be a picnic and we're not going to have any issue now. It is still going to be, you're still going to know a powerful hurricane is passing very close to your area. But we have kind of seen the worst case winds come down a little bit. Now, I want a caveat here. It does look better this morning, and I'm going to show you guys the forecasts. I think you're responsible and you're smart and you know how to handle this. But I will let you know that, like we've seen in the last couple times, some of these storms taking this sort of path like to dive to the right at the last second. So if Idalia dives a little bit and it kind of rides the right edge of this cone and comes closer to that 301 corridor, all these reds and purples shift over here a little bit. And you are still potentially talking about wind gusts into the 80s and 90s type thing. And the difference in 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s is a big difference. So be thankful that it looks a little better today, but still prepare as if you're going to get hurricane force wind gusts. That is something you should just simply be preparing for, because we can't tell with that much finite detail if that core of stronger winds might not brush the area. But again, that's the Highway 301 corridor down to Gainesville. And as you see, anyone to the east of 301, that's all our major counties are currently now in that tropical storm threshold. And then some of southeast Georgia, actually, because of that onshore wind flow, might still be getting wind gusts a little bit above 70 miles an hour. I don't think they'll get 110, but I think, 70s and 80s are possible for Waycross, Brunswick, and Valdosta this morning going into the day on Wednesday. As we go some of the other threats here this morning, we have, if I can get the map to zoom, I am boy, we're struggling right now. Storm surge threat is still not that big of a deal for most of the area. Three feet or so as far as a lot of the Georgia coastline, because you'll kind of have this concave shape to the coast, so more of the onshore winds might be an issue for the Georgia coastline, but down for the Jacksonville coastline, we're expecting a surge 1 to 3 feet or so. There will be some minor flooding on the coastal, intercoastal, and the St. Johns River, but we're not going to have that crazy Irma back flooding situation, and we're not going to have any significant storm surge associated with Idalia. Rainfall threat is going to be fairly high to the center and north of the track, and this is a little bit flipped from how it usually is. Usually it's to the south and east of the cone, but right now it's actually along into the north of the cone. Idalia will be mixing up with a cold front draped across Georgia. This will be the focal point for very heavy rain, and this stretches all the way through Georgia and into even the North Carolina area, almost to the Outer Banks region. And that's where the heaviest rain will fall thanks to that cold front enhancing the tropical rainfall. So the Jacksonville area generally is expecting 2 to 4 inches. Some of the more western counties, Baker, maybe some of Clay and Nassau, are expecting a little higher totals, probably 4 to 8 inches. And then south of town, south and east, like Hastings and Flagler, you're probably looking at a little bit less rain than that. Localized flooding, but nothing significant. And then some flooding along the region here. But it's kind of the same story. We're not going to see Black Creek overflowing its banks and all the crazy stuff. It's not going to be that bad as far as the flooding goes. But north and west of town, you are going to see some pretty heavy rainfall at times, and some localized significant flooding is still possible. So keep an eye out for that. And then if you live northward, of course, like we said earlier in the other video, a lot of rainfall coming for a lot of folks in the Carolinas. So that's most of the threat graphics. The tornado threat has come up a little bit. The Storm Prediction Center has increased this some. There will be a significant threat of tornadoes on Tuesday night and through Wednesday. And there will be tornado watches. Please have ways to get alerts and all that stuff, because it's going to be very important as it moves in. And again, the last thing I'll say for Jacksonville is, yes, this is a little better this morning. I'm encouraged a little bit by the westward ticks. But again, anything on this right side of the cone remains a very bad time. And anything bringing that core closer is bad news. So that's your Jacksonville update. So we're going to roll back and talk about some other weather this morning. So curious pattern, you have what you have here with Idalia, and then you actually have Hurricane Franklin close enough to where a ridge is actually building between these two storms. A high pressure ridge is nosing in behind Franklin and ahead of Idalia. So that's one of the reasons I think you've seen this little bit of a westward tick, is probably because Hurricane Franklin is so strong that upper level high is probably pushing a little bit more than was initially anticipated to do so. We can see the broad trough over the eastern U.S. today, associated cold front moving across the eastern Tennessee Valley down into southern Mississippi, and then back across through the mid-Atlantic region. And that is kind of the rails that Idalia is going on, or more like this is the current forecast track to go up into this weakness of the ridge. This morning, the intensification is beginning. It's beginning in earnest. And what we see here on the IR presentation are a couple of things. Number one, we see these dancing pinks inside this mass of white cloud tops. The white cloud tops are already very cold. The pinks are incredibly cold cloud tops. And when you see these little popcorn-like bursts dancing around in there, those are vertical hot towers. They're also little mesovortices. They're incredibly small, powerful features dancing around in what is probably going to be an early eye. You cannot see the eye yet because it's obscured by clouds. When storms intensify, they start off by being obscured by clouds, and then their eyes gradually clear out as they become more intense. What we've seen since last night is that Idalia left the coast of Cuba and likely began to build a partial eye wall as it did so. The frictional assistance from Cuba probably helped in this case to get the winds a little more focused on rotating into that center because of friction. So the storm is able to tighten up a little bit using that land to help it. And if it's directly over land, it'll harm it because it robs it of its fuel source. But if it passes close to land, sometimes we see a little bit of convergence tighten up the core of the hurricane. We actually have a little bit of a data feed this morning from the Cuba radar in Cuba, and this is kind of hard to see, but if we can zoom in a little bit, this is the latest this morning. This is the eye of Idalia. I'll switch to a little more bright marker. This is the eye of Idalia, and it's a closed eye. It is a fully closed eye. Rain has wrapped up sheer and around the eye completely. So the eye is surrounded by green completely. There is no breaks in this eye this morning. You also see these yellow bands rotating around, and notice you have this half moon shape in the last frame of the GIF showing that Idalia already has half an eye wall beginning to form, and this is quickly rotating up shear. Sometimes this is a struggle. Sometimes you see this start and stop, and then it starts again, then it stops, and it starts and stops. But Idalia producing these intense bursts of high cloud tops and around this eye. That is that eye slowly rotating up shear and building thunderstorms around the eye. And as it continues to do so, that will cause more intensification. It will cause more pressure falls in the center of the storm. You'll have a deeper pressure difference between the center of the storm and the outer part of the storm that causes the winds to increase, and you have a developing hurricane on your hands. So that is kind of one of the things we are watching this morning. The other big thing is the trough capture. So I've had questions about the interaction with Idalia and that dive to the right and whatnot. And what we have in this case, and while we're maybe looking at more of a westward adjustment, again, is that ridge that is going on. So this is the upper levels of the atmosphere. This is 500 millibars, and there's a big trough coming down to get Idalia. Now the trough looks like it's way up here in the Great Lakes. You may think, well, wow, that's a lot of distance between Idalia. I mean, you're showing me the trough that's in Ohio, and you're showing me a hurricane that's in Cuba. Can they really interact? And the answer is yes, because you can see energy from this trough is rotating down into Idalia and beginning to scoop it up. The main trough is up here, but you have some energy breaking southward and breaking into the Gulf of Mexico and coming up under Idalia and scooping it up. At the same time, we can see that there's some ridging building in behind Franklin and ahead of Idalia. So this is causing the storm to push due northward, and it's going to rotate around that ridge. So there's a delicate balance here of how much this ridge builds and how strong this trough is, and how much the trough actually then begins to break the edge of the ridge down to let Idalia come in. That's why those small micro adjustments mean a lot. In some cases, what we see is at the last minute, you'll have a shortwave trough dig into the long wave. It enhances the trough, and then the storm at the last second feels a stronger trough and it cuts harder. That's kind of what Ian did. It was supposed to go a little bit further north into a weaker trough. Ian got stronger. And in some cases, the stronger trough, the stronger storm, the stronger hurricane it will feel the steering flow more. So what it really comes down to is, how does the steering flow look when the storm gets stronger? So the models think the storm is this strong, the storm's actually stronger. So then when the model brings the trough in, it's actually stronger. And in this case, it looks like it's going to capture the storm further north before it turns it because it's stronger. In some cases, say if this trough was a little slower, say this little short wave was actually maybe back here, it was about 12 hours behind, Idalia would be stronger, and then she would feel that trough later and cut a little harder to the south. So it's kind of hard to explain, but there's a delicate balance, and it does have to do with the hurricane's strength and the timing of the trough coming to get it. Because I switch you forward a little bit, see how that energy sort of pivots. You had this energy here, and then it pivoted around. So you still have this long wave, but you have this like bigger perturbation inside the long wave, and then you have the hurricane being picked up and being influenced to move into that. So that is, I think, why we've seen some of the westward adjustments, and now that ridge behind Franklin kind of a little more shifted and Idalia moves in. So that's kind of the other thing we're watching this morning, is that steering mechanism with the two and the dance that trough and the hurricane do. This is something we more typically see in October, not so much in August. That's why it's so weird, but it is something we're watching as a very powerful early season trough is coming down and interacting with Idalia. I'll also show you the models this morning. This is the 12Z model run suite of models. This was earlier yesterday morning. This is midday yesterday, this is yesterday evening, and this is the latest run this morning. They've clustered, and they've all uniformly shifted to the west. Now, that uniformity does not mean they are accurate. They can all shift together back the other way. And you notice this black one, the black one is actually not a computer model. That is the Hurricane Center's official prediction. So the Hurricane Center is actually currently sitting to the west of all major computer model guidance from the suite of models and the GFS and the Euro. This is the GFS model this morning, showing a landfall at 955 millibars in the upper end of Appalachia Bay. Euro a little bit to the east of that, but still showing right along the Hurricane Center's forecast track, maybe just a hair to the east, or to the west rather, at 977. These models we typically don't use for intensity. They're not very good at calling intensity at landfall. The GFS is notably much stronger than the Euro, so hence why it's probably further west, again, stronger storm, feels the trough more, goes further north. The European sees a little bit of a weaker storm at 977, so it pulls a little more to the east, just a little bit of a difference. The HWRF, one of our high resolution intensity models, does bring this into upper Appalachia Bay as a 943 millibar hurricane, which would be very powerful, would likely be well into category 4 at that case. And the HMOM, one of the cousins of the HWRF, comes in at 945, similar intensity and similar track. For what it's worth, the intensity models have actually not jumped into category 4 yet. The Hurricane Center actually sitting above all of the intensity guidance at 6Z, which is really weird to see. I would have thought some of this would have come up by now, but all the intensity models are actually not buying that Adalia will get a ton stronger, and I'm not exactly sure why. You really think they would be, but for whatever reason, they aren't. So we're going to watch that carefully as well. I think they're going to come up, and I don't like these intensity models that much anyway. I mean, you use your brain. Don't, these things are kind of whatever. I like them for track. I'm not a big fan of this, output for intensity. That's a nice product. Tropical Tidbits does a great job with it. I don't like the models themselves. I think they're kind of out to lunch and whatnot. So that's kind of the latest this morning on the weather things we're watching. Again, guys, as Adalia moves northward, this is a very favorable environment she's going into. As I kick back to the water vapor, the shear is rapidly weakening. See all these bands rotating upwards today? That is all the up shear flow moving into that region now that the shear is less. And if you see the streaming cloud tops, they're going this way. So up until this point, she was getting battered by that more north to northwest wind shear, but the clouds are beginning to expand and they're starting to kind of race off the edges here, and there's a little bit of the edges here. Means the trough coming to get this is a lot lighter, and the upper trough that was influencing Adalia has moved off. The small one over the northern Gulf, I know why, because it's been raining over us for 2 days. That's moved off, and now you have the broader trough, which is much more lazy and not as strong, and you're starting to have the shear vector move with the hurricane versus against it. So the hurricane's moving this direction, the winds were moving this direction. It was a direct like headwind, but now the storm almost has a little bit of a tailwind, which will still aggravate it a little bit, but it won't be the detriment that it was when it was near Cuba, where it basically that shear put a lid on this thing for almost 24 hours. We unfortunately will not get that again, and Adalia is moving into a very low shear environment and a vastly warm water environment where it's going to have nothing but rocket fuel beneath it. And since we see the structural processes tightening up and Dahlia's already formed an eye, I would say she's right on schedule for rapid intensification. And the question is just how much. And I really want to caution y'all that Category 3 is the current intensity forecast. We have seen Ida, we have seen Laura, we've seen Michael, we've seen Ian, all blow past what we thought they could do for intensity. And Ida or Idalia is over some of the warmest water we've seen in the Gulf of Mexico in a long time. So the potential for this to be higher than 3, I think it'll probably be a 4 when it comes in. Um, is very possible. So we got to watch that last minute intensity adjustment. It may jump above and it may change some of the forecast parameters near the coast. 12 feet may become 15 feet for the surge, etc. And we'll have to see if that interaction changes, if it takes any last minute wobbles to the right or to the left. And again, a small wobble can be a big difference of when it comes in, where it comes in, and who exactly gets what. So that's what I got for you guys this morning. Your tropical update. Again, Jacksonville, get ready. Tropical storm conditions. Again, the worst of the weather for you will be Wednesday. It'll be Wednesday during the day. You're going to have the first bands come in tomorrow night. It's going to start more in earnest early or after sunrise Wednesday. It'll be getting noticeably worse. The worst of the hurricane will be during the day on Wednesday, and by Wednesday evening, your conditions will be quickly improving, and then we follow on from there. So that's what I got for you guys this morning on your long update. That's what I got for you today. I will be back later this afternoon with more updates, and I'll probably be tracking it off and on throughout the day, so stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.